Very much. I just want to say welcome to everybody and thank you for coming to this panel discussion. I want to take some time to introduce our panelists, and so just excuse me while I read off some notes from their bio because I want to properly introduce them. So right next to me I have Dr. Scott Hutchins. He is the Deputy Undersecretary for the U.S. Department of Agricultural Research, Education, and Economics Mission Area, which is comprised of the Agricultural Research Service, the Economic Research Service, the National Agricultural Statistics Service, and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. He was sworn in to this position earlier this year, and prior to this position, he spent about nearly 32 years with Corteva Agriscience, and where he held many roles in program management, human resources, Six Sigma, R&D management, global administration. He's also a board-certified entomologist and an adjunct professor of entomology at the University of Lincoln, Nebraska. He received his bachelor's in entomology from Auburn University, his MS from Mississippi State, and his PhD from Iowa State. Next, we have Dr. Michelle Calvoa Lorenzo is a technical consultant for the U.S. Cattle and Swine Business Unit at Elanco Animal Health. She joined Elanco in 2015 and is an expert in animal welfare. In her current role, she leads discussions and develops strategies related to animal welfare with the area focused on research, communication, guidance, innovative services to the livestock industry, practicing vets in the public, and also Elanco's customers and employees. She received both of her master's and PhD degrees from the University of California, Davis, and prior to joining Elanco, she was at Oklahoma State University as an assistant professor, and she strives to have a positive impact on livestock welfare and enhance its role in sustainable agriculture. In the middle of Dr. Nick Austin, who's the Director of Agricultural Development within the Global Growth and Opportunity at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He joined the foundation in 2017. Previously, he was interim executive director at CGIAR, and prior to that, he served for 7 years as the CEO of the Australian Centre for the International Agricultural Research, where he's responsible for leading the center's efforts in improving the incomes and livelihoods of smallholder farmers in developing countries. He is from a farming family, and he holds a PhD in irrigation and water quality from the University of Melbourne, a master's in sustainable management from the University of Sydney, and a bachelor's of engineering in agriculture with honors. He's a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and he's held many senior executive positions in both private and non-for-profit companies. Then we have Professor Nicola Shedbolt, who she wears many different hats. She's a professor of Farm and Agribusiness Management at Massey University in New Zealand. Her research interests include cooperatives, farm business analysis, and risk analysis and overall strategic management by farmers. She also has been the elected director of Fonterra Cooperative for the last 9 years. She's currently the director of the International Food and Agribusiness Management Association and the independent chair of Hopkins Farming Group Limited. She's the editor of 2 academic journals, and she's a fellow of the New Zealand Institute of Primary Industry Management, and also a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit. She's also a farmer with over 30 years of experience. She is a graduate of the University of Nottingham with a bachelor's in agriculture. She received her master's from the University of Canterbury, Lincoln College in agricultural sciences, and she received her diploma in business studies from Massey University. Last but not least, we have Mr. Eddie Pesantas, who is the Undersecretary of Livestock Production from the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock from Ecuador. He has served in this role for over a year, And earlier this year, he was the company representative in signing Ecuador's accession to the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock. Eddie was born in Quito, and he is a livestock farmer who is dedicated his work to sustainable development of livestock in Ecuador, and he's also a champion for small and medium producers of Ecuador. He completed his bachelor's degree in agricultural engineering from the University Earth in Costa Rica, and he also obtained a master's in business administration from the University of the Armed Forces. Eddie will be responding to my questions in Spanish, so, and then we have a translator who will then translate it in English, so just be aware that there might be a slight pause. So anyways, thank you very much to our 5 individuals for agreeing to be on our panel. And before we get started, I just would like to tell you the layout of this discussion. I have 5 questions that I'm going to pose to our panelists, and then once they have answered those 5 questions, I'm going to open it up to the audience. And like Susan mentioned, you guys will be writing those questions down on a piece of paper, and there'll be runners that will come and gather them, and then when the time is appropriate, they'll come and bring them up to me for me to read. All right, so we are here to talk about innovation, the role of innovation in sustainable livestock systems. Before we do that, we need to define what innovation is. So the conference has a definition of what innovation is, and it includes the technical, institutional, and policy aspects of bringing approaches to bear on issues. However, we all know that there is not an agreed upon set definition for innovation. So before we can actually have a really informative talk, we need to come to a common understanding of what innovation is. So my first question is, how would each of you define innovation? And we'll start with Scott, and we'll work our way down to Eddie.
Very good. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for hosting this, and USDA is very proud to be a sponsor of this event, as well as to participate in the dialogue and the discussion that's occurring all week. Well, it's always dangerous to define anything, so if I can, I'm just going to characterize a few things. And first of all, I think we need to recognize that innovation is both a verb and a noun. And to the earlier speaker who mentioned sustainability is a journey and not a destination, I think innovation as well is a journey, not a destination, although it does have a number of milestones along the way. And if you don't believe me, then you probably have not waited in line for the next version of the iPhone that comes out every year or so. So it is both milestones as well as a journey. But from a USDA standpoint, right in the first part of the USDA vision statement, it says to expand economic opportunity through innovation. And I think those are key words that really represent the outcome, the goal, and the intent of what innovation is when it's used as either a verb or a noun. And in fact, President Lincoln, when he actually created the USDA, right in the middle of the Civil War, amazingly, he had the foresight to actually establish it on the basis of creating opportunity and innovation for agriculture even back in that time. So it's actually central to the existence of the USDA, and has been central to the development of agriculture within the United States and indeed around the world. So innovation is indeed a process, but it has to be nurtured, it has to be developed, and it has to be encouraged through a number of supporting systems, whether they're regulatory environments, intellectual property rights, and really create an appetite for risk in order to have entrepreneurs make change and move forward. The private sector plays a tremendous role, and one of the opportunities I think we have, and one of the ones I've been advocating for within USDA, is to create a U.S., in our case, a U.S. agricultural innovation strategy that incorporates both the private sector and the public sector. We certainly have developed numbers of strategies in the public sector, science strategies, and the rest of it, but when you look at agriculture and see that there's $3 invested in the private sector for every dollar invested in the public sector, you recognize the two sectors need to work together on behalf of innovation within agriculture. One excellent example just down the road here is the National Ag and Bio Defense Facility, which the U.S. government's investing over $1 billion to develop a state-of-the-science and state-of-the-art facility that, yes, will be doing public research in order to defend from diseases and so forth of animals, but is building right into that complex the opportunity to do pilot plant ramp-ups of vaccines and the rest of it to transfer to the private sector. So that kind of partnership is absolutely critical. So the way I would characterize it is, for sure, that it's a noun, We need to have that endpoint. Farmers and ranchers need those innovations, but it's also a process and one that continually needs to be nourished.
Thank you, Scott. Michelle.
Thank you. So as briefly mentioned before in the introduction, I'm with Elanco Animal Health, right? And I'm also an animal welfare expert, so just know that I'm a little biased in how I'm going to approach this. But of course, at Elanco, our vision is that food and companionship enrich lives. And so we are dedicated to rigorously innovating to continue to improve animal health worldwide. We at Elanco truly believe that healthy animals are really the center point to finding solutions to overcoming all of the global issues that we actually have been discussing, not just this morning as a review of yesterday, but I'm sure that as we'll be talking throughout the week. So in terms of innovations, we believe that the pragmatic view or definition in defining it is that it has to be viewed holistically. And so whether you take it from the context, I've got examples here from yesterday of clinically treating animals, right? So we heard from Dr. Nidia Gochi from Anthra, and she talked a lot about using traditional-based plant-based ways of acquiring knowledge and helping us solve problems there, or even using the mobile devices, right, in India. Or we're thinking about creating new systems or surveillance programs to help monitor and understand how strains or other things move across food systems, as we heard with Dr. Armando Hoet in the surveillance system discussion. Or as we think about trying to feed the world efficiently, right? And I know we heard yesterday from John Neiman from Cargill on irrigation projects and blockchain technology. So there's a lot of different ways that we can try and characterize what we're doing here today. And so all of those things are multifaceted, they're complex, right? And so when it comes to innovation, you've got to look at it through those lenses, and that it's got to be a holistic strategy and a holistic approach. And so the way we define it at Elanco is kind of twofold. There's the one factor, one bucket, I can call it the tools bucket, right? Where we actually provide physical tools, and many of you are obviously more familiar with the products or compounds that we manufacture to help, again, improve animal health worldwide. So that's the one bucket, and there's also lots of new digital advances. It's not just compounds, but lots of other physical tools, and we'll get to those, I'm sure, in the next several sections. But the other part of it, and I'm very, very empowered myself to hear that this bucket I'm going to describe here is something that I keep hearing constantly throughout yesterday and today, is the power of knowledge and how to transfer that knowledge. And that's definitely one reason why I joined Elanco, and it's something that I'm very proud that the animal health industry is really embracing. It's not just about the physical tools and things you can put in people's hands, but it's the knowledge, the training, the translation, understanding the cultural norms. We had a lot of great discussions yesterday, again, about all of those different environmental factors that can really influence how someone adopts those tools and actually implements them. So I think there's a lot of power to understanding how we take knowledge and transfer it appropriately, sensitively, and accurately as part of that idea of innovation. So I think it's kind of a twofold definition from Elanco's standpoint.
Thank you. Nick?
Thanks, Cara. Pleasure to be here, and the Gates Foundation's proud to be supporting this agenda. For me, innovation, the definition's pretty simple. It's doing things better by doing things differently. In whatever manifestation that takes. And often, I think conceptually, it's around new technologies, about new innovations, new products, and that's certainly been a strong emphasis of the Gates Foundation, and our work is anchored on the premise that all lives have equal value. So for the agriculture team, which is one of the largest in the foundation, and the livestock component of the agriculture work has been a significant and growing part of our emphasis. Very definitely taken a strong orientation towards appropriate vaccines or locally adapted or tropical breeds, or ways in which new scientific breakthroughs can bring new opportunities for smallholder farmers or for pastoralists. But I think importantly, and sometimes overlooked, has been innovation in systems and in markets. And we know that market systems and systems that deliver technologies and products to smallholders don't work generally anywhere near adequately enough. So getting markets functioning and innovation in markets and building on, I think, Michelle and Scott's important observations around knowledge and the way in which new technologies around data, around digital can bring new insights, better information. We've got woefully poor understanding of livelihoods of smallholder crop livestock producers or pastoralists, where they're located, how the livestock are changing, how their livelihoods are changing, increasingly urbanised, what that means for new opportunities. And so I think we're now starting to see with new remotely sensed data and new ways of collecting data at a local level, better insights, which is giving us better information to better target solutions, understand where markets aren't working, particularly for women. And we've heard in presentations already today around the role of women in dairy, for example, in South Asia. And so that's a really strong emphasis that the way in which livestock innovation brings benefit for smallholders, both men and, importantly, for women.
Nicola.
Right, thank you, and thank you also for the invitation to be here. So I guess from a business perspective, to me, innovation is a response to a problem for which there's no known solution or process. So first you have to have a problem, otherwise it's just an academic exercise. And sometimes a solution or process may be known to others, but it may not be known to the person who is currently dealing with the problem. So, whether you're out the back of the farm trying to sort something out, there's nobody there, there's no internet connection, you've just got to find a way of doing it, you innovate. And so that response is the critical part. They're not also getting the problem right is the other. Problem definition is another key part of it. But that was my very simple and short definition.
Eddie.
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Okay. Un placer estar acá con un panel tan importante.
It is a pleasure for me to be here with such a distinguished panel.
Creo que la respuesta a innovación se han dado de muy buena manera.
I think that all the answers regarding innovation have been very thorough.
Sin embargo, nosotros hemos generado un concepto de la palabra innovación y sostenibilidad.
But on regards to that, we have always also generated another concept regarding innovation and sustainability, in spite of that.
Para nosotros la innovación es una herramienta que nos ayuda a situar estrategias de desarrollo en diferentes escenarios.
For us, innovation is a tool that will help us to have all the strengths that we need for different scenarios.
Como ustedes entenderán, el mundo es muy diverso y cada población tiene diferentes temas a desarrollar.
And as you might know, the world is diverse, so we have different goals to achieve and different strategies that we need to set forth to do that.
Nosotros como innovación siempre la utilizamos en el momento de generar una diferenciación en un producto.
Innovation we use for us to try to differentiate our products.
Entendemos que para salir del subdesarrollo necesitamos tener un componente que es conocimiento, más tecnología nos va a dar competitividad.
We in our country, because we are an underdeveloped country, we know that we need to have knowledge and technology for us to be able to be competitive.
En este motivo es donde entra la innovación, muy pegado en el caso ecuatoriano a la sostenibilidad.
And that's why we consider innovation we think that innovation has to go hand in hand with sustainability in the case of Ecuador.
En la actualidad, la política ecuatoriana de producción solo genera innovación en base netamente a sostenibilidad. Es decir, que no quede ningún producto residual en nuestras prácticas de innovación en campo.
Well, our policies say that for us to be able to innovate, we have to produce without any waste. So we don't have to leave any waste because we want to be sustainable too.
La innovación en general puede ser una de las herramientas más útiles en el momento de llegar a un resultado diferente de lo que ya tenemos. Es el mecanismo en el cual nosotros trabajamos día a día.
We work on a daily basis for us to have to create more innovation, for us to be able to be more sustainable and to use our resources accordingly.
Es muy fuerte explicarlo ahora, es muy largo explicarlo en la actualidad, lo que hacemos, pero prácticamente nosotros no somos un país gran productor de granos como lo es Estados Unidos.
Well, it's hard for me to explain because that would be a long explanation because we are not a grain producer, a big grain producer like the United States is.
Por tal motivo, nosotros hemos escogido un sistema sostenible y no convencional de producción porque somos muy buenos en producción de biomasa y alimentación a pasto, en el caso de ganadería.
And we have chosen to use a sustainable approach because we're very good producing biomass and we have a lot of pastures for us to be able to have livestock.
Toda nuestra innovación en la actualidad viene en producción de pasturas y cuidando del ambiente. Me fui un poco más al tema ambiental porque quería complementar estas grandes respuestas.
And I discussed the environment a little bit further because I wanted to complement to the previous answers. And that's where we have concentrated our efforts into more production of pasture for us to be able to be more environmentally friendly.
Thank you, Eddie. Okay, so based on what I heard many different things with Nicola. She had a very simple, straightforward definition, and then with Michelle, it was a very complex definition. So I'm going to try and put it all together. Innovation is a multi-stage, holistic process. Scott was talking about process where organizations can transform ideas into something better, like Nick was saying, a new and improved product or service or process in order to advance, compete, or differentiate, like Eddie was saying, themselves successfully in the marketplace. So getting back to Nicola, that's typically what an organization wants to do, right? Is they want to improve themselves, they want to advance or compete, and so this is the way that they do it with new and better products. Could be products, services, or a process. So using that definition for innovation for this panel discussion, we're going to move forward. But I also want to introduce another definition, which is disruptive innovation. That's innovation that alters the structure or the conduct of the industry. So a very simple example would be Netflix. Netflix has changed how we view TV and videos. It's changed home entertainment. Amazon is also another example of disruptive innovation. It's basically changed how we shop. So, given how we define innovation up here on this panel and disruptive innovation, I would like each of you to provide me with an example of positive disruptive innovation that you see up and coming that could possibly affect the global livestock system. And then, onto that is where along that supply chain does it have its most impact? Michelle, do you want to take a stab at this one first?
Oh, boy, sure, I will. I think when it comes to those that are positively disruptive innovations, I think a lot of us tend to think about those that have to do with data technology, so large databases, AI, genomics, big data analytics, or smart technologies, right? So utilizing equipment or sensors or mobile type of capabilities. We saw Mr. Tom Jones talked yesterday on a High Plains feed yard, and he talked about a lot of these different capabilities that he's utilizing to really hone in on his herds and understand his feedlot cattle and their productivity levels and also their environmental impact, right? And even biotechnology, I think there's some positively disruptive innovators in that area. And I know I went to Dr. Allison Vaninanam's conversation yesterday on the use of biotechnology and genomics as part of increasing the sustainability of livestock. But the one example that I would like to talk about is actually something that's essentially it's one of the greatest disruptors that we see in livestock production, and it's also one of the oldest. Okay, and it's manpower. It's our people. And to think about it and frame it in the idea of these disruptive technologies and so forth, I think there's a path forward in this idea of social technologies. It's likely going to be the most difficult to apply because as humans, right, we're kind of complex too, right? And we've got a wide variety of different cultures and religious views and so forth, lots of factors that really make how we work together in this global livestock industry across the world. It's going to make it really complex, but if we can apply these, I think they will be very, very powerful. I think they're, especially again from the perspective, from animal health and animal welfare, there's a very strong link, and we see this in a lot of animal science research and animal behavior research, very strong link in the animal-human interaction. And really, really honing in, again, on not just technologies, but the power of knowledge and helping to empower animal caretakers, giving them the tools, but also teaching them the why and why it matters to use these technologies or these capabilities in the right manner at the right time. And so I think this idea of social technology is a really, really important one, and I think that obviously has widespread impact in the areas where we actually have live animals. Okay, so you said we're in the supply chain, and so I think that it would be the most difficult to apply. And I know this morning I heard the concept of practice change approach, and I know some of the things I've heard from the research I've been reading is change behavior mechanisms. So trying to instill or change behaviors in a more positive manner with positive attitudes, positive beliefs towards animals to really, again, enhance the human-animal interaction and really build up the workforce development from that perspective. So I think that's social technologies, that one type of positive disruptor that we'll see.
So when you're talking about that social component, when it comes to people, are you talking about both capacity building and giving them resources, or are you focusing more on one of those aspects?
Yeah, absolutely, across the board.
Across the board?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Nick, do you have anything to add to that in terms of maybe from a developing country perspective?
Yeah, I'd certainly like to build on that, and I think when you talk about disruption, it speaks to me of scale and how we can achieve impact at scale. And I think we all know that we're talking about 1 billion people who depend on livestock for their livelihoods, nutrition, incomes, and many of those are the hardest to reach. Pastoralists typically are the hardest to reach with new innovations and new technologies. So when you talk about positive disruptions, for the Gates Foundation, we think through how systems can change to improve the opportunities for smallholders or for pastoralists in productivity, in nutrition, in gender outcomes, and in incomes. So we organise our work around 3, if you like, bodies of work around animal health, around animal systems, and around animal production. So we're seeing technological breakthroughs offering real potential. In animal health, our work has evolved from single breed by disease combinations into more syndromic approaches, and more recently into tunable platforms for vaccines, recognising that if we're going to achieve scale, we need to look at more system approaches. Similarly, with production, tremendous opportunities with some of the modern biotechnologies, precision breeding, gene editing, and the like, and genomic selection. Again, real challenges in how we can understand the genotype-phenotype interactions in a smallholder context. So, again, to Michelle's observations around the importance of data and the way in which data can bring new insights there, we support things like WAHIS plus the World Animal Health Information System, how we can evolve the global databases and then more locally understand what's happening. So you could call these disruptive. Maybe it's just it's a disruption in bringing technologies from the rich world, if you like, into a locally adapted approach for smallholder contexts and pastoralist contexts.
Earlier you mentioned female farmers. Is some of those innovations geared towards women?
Yeah, very much so. And I think it also is in the selection of where we focus our efforts around which species. And so typically for women, it's the small ruminants and poultry that are going to be the important source of income, but also nutrition for their families. And so we do work in improving the poultry system, dual purpose poultry, and how we can scale opportunities to increase the number of eggs or the production of meat in a low input system. So we recognise these systems will increasingly commercialise and industrialise over time, but there are opportunities for different trajectories in that development path that can be more inclusive. And the Foundation invests in agriculture and in livestock, not for livestock or agriculture per se, but the way in which livestock can lift people out of poverty. And so that's particularly why we emphasise the poultry and small ruminant work, or have done small ruminant work. I could talk more about some of the challenges in finding scale with small ruminants, but poultry has really become more important and in our investment because, in part, it meets those 4 goals around nutrition, income, and productivity and gender equality, women's empowerment.
Thank you. Eddie, you got an example of positive disruptive innovation?
Claro.
Of course.
La innovación, nosotros nos gusta hablar mucho de la innovación en
We
recursos
love
naturales.
to talk about innovation, especially for research.
Es una característica muy propia de Sudamérica, Centroamérica. Tenemos lugares muy megadiversos.
This is something that we are used to in South America and Central America because of our biodiversity.
Pero a su vez necesitamos conservarlos y necesitamos generar producciones, un esquema de producción que ayude al ambiente.
And we need to conserve our environment, but we also need to be able to produce in an environmentally friendly way to help our environment.
Un sistema en el cual el animal o los animales, los seres humanos y la política de un país puedan compartir mutuamente.
A system where animals, human beings, and also the politicians that create the policies can survive and live all together.
Un ejemplo muy importante en Latinoamérica, sobre todo Sudamérica, en innovación es nuestra producción en base de pastos.
Well, a great example for our innovation in Latin America and South America is our pasture production.
Que a su vez, con la gran tecnología y la investigación que necesitamos, porque todos los países necesitamos mucha investigación tecnológica, como se lo ha dicho, y un gran capital en investigación de todas las nuevas enfermedades que se presentan en la parte sanitaria, que es un problema que nos va a atacar a todos.
And with technology and research, we can target all the things that we need, because it's been said before that we need capital for research and development, and that's the only way for us to be able to fight all the diseases that we're going to be facing.
Sanidad, ambiente, son 2 puntales importantísimos de innovación en la actualidad, en donde hay mucho por desarrollar.
Health, the environment, we have to work towards that, because those are 2 key topics that we need to address constantly.
Y en la actualidad, gracias a la tecnología, tenemos una herramienta externa que nos puede ayudar mucho, que es toda la tecnología y la capacidad de transmitirlo por redes sociales, toda esta información.
And the third tool that we have nowadays to spread the word, it's social media, because that's a great way for us to be able to communicate everything that we have done regarding research and health.
All right, thank you. So social media also plays a huge part in developing countries in Africa. What about here in the US?
Well, social media is part of a digital revolution as well, and I just want to continue with that theme of verb and noun. And in the context of noun, I really think there are 4 major areas of technology and things that are going to have just a dramatic impact on agriculture in all phases going forward. And also we should recognize how far we've come as well. I mean, if you look at the history and I think some of the slides were presented earlier on where we've been and where we are, because it happens day by day and week by week and year by year, we sometimes lose sight of the productivity increases and the sustainability increases that have occurred. But going forward, there's really going to be, I think, 4 major themes or areas that are going to define innovation from a technology standpoint. And I'll just loosely refer to them as advanced genetics. I mean, you can call that gene editing, you can call whatever's after gene editing, but really advanced genetics is going to play a huge role for both plants and animals, and it already is. That we just haven't really fully realized the potential value on what that can bring. Digital agriculture has already been referenced to, but it just impresses me every day on how quickly these technologies are finding their way into mainstream agriculture within the United States and other parts of the world. And the great part about it is the speed that they'll be able to, how they'll be able to accelerate, because they're very loosely and they don't really require regulation the way chemical and oftentimes biological innovations do. Artificial intelligence and what I call intervention algorithms, to where we can really understand and diagnose and cure on a very quick basis. And of course, that's going to have a tremendous opportunity. And then the fourth one I would refer to from kind of an overall theme is what I call new age whole farm management. When I was a student at Iowa State taking Ag Econ, I was always fascinated by the farm management class and the linear programming and those kind of things. If you fast forward to today, what it really is doing is trying to reduce complexity for the rancher and for the grower. And if you look at the major innovations that have been adopted over time and you break it down, the adoptive value has been to reduce complexity for the grower and for the rancher. If you look at herbicide tolerant crops as an example, they didn't really provide any better weed control. What they did is they just really simplified that whole process. And so we have to keep in mind that farmers deal with a tremendous amount and ranchers deal with a tremendous amount of complexity, and we can utilize the power of the next generation digital and everything as a way to really minimize that. But on the verb side, the process side, there's also a couple things I would point out as well. First of all, it's not a random process. We need to be thinking deliberately about stages of innovation. We need to talk about transformative types of innovations and plan for those. We need to think about adjacent innovations, how we accelerate digital agriculture as an example. And then we need to think about the core piece, the kind of things that we do very well, I think, for example, with extension and how we develop what's coming out of the universities in the United States today for that purpose. So yes, it can solve problems, but we can also use it as a way to create opportunities and tie into the advantage. And we also have to think from a government and a policy standpoint, we really have to think seriously about how we create that enriching environment, that nourishing environment. Secretary of State Pompeo, who's a Kansan, recently participated in the Global Entrepreneurs Summit in Europe, and he pointed out three things of value to entrepreneurs that the government and the public sector should enhance. One is the right to private property, which encourages investment, the rule of law, a legal system that's predictable and consistent, and unnecessary regulations. Not to say no regulations, but unnecessary and unproductive regulations. We need to create that environment. We need to be able to create the incubators for innovations in all these areas that we have. And the one I didn't mention, I kind of stuck to the science one, but as I was actually flying in yesterday on American Airlines, I found this advertisement, which I thought was pretty interesting. I know you can't see it from there, but it's a company called Crowd Cow, and it says, directly sourced meat from independent farms, nose to tail cuts, pick your weight, pick your farm, pick the story, craft beef. And so these theoretical blockchain applications and these kinds of things are not just, theoretical stories. They're actually coming to life through entrepreneurs. And that's another, I think, key part of innovation going forward. The disruptions are going to come from where we least expect them. A lot of the disruptions that we're experiencing today did not start, unfortunately, in land-grant agricultural universities. They're emphasized, they're developed, and they're utilized there, but they've come from Silicon Valley, they've come from other entrepreneur startups, they've come from places like that, and we need to recognize that and find a way to synergize with that.
Good, thank you. Nicola, Scott talked about holistic farm management. Can you add to that or add your comments?
Yeah, well, certainly a lot's been covered already, so
Yes.
I'll try and just cover perhaps from a different perspective slightly. When a number of people have mentioned AI. On the bus on the way in from the airport, I was talking to a lady from WWF who was coming to the same function, and she said, have you ever been to Kansas before? And I said, yeah, about 40 years ago I came into Kansas to do a course on AI. And she said, gosh, that was really an advanced, of time. And I said, artificial insemination? I was working on a cattle ranch in Nebraska, and I needed an extra skill to get another job, so I went and learned how to So time moves on. But AI, I mean, that whole area of genetics and the use of genetics is key, whether it's in animals or whether it's in the feed. And I look at what's happened in the past, over those 40 years and how things have evolved. And then our task, as I realized when I saw your email again, you're looking for disruptive innovation on the horizon, not what happened in the past. And we always say that the power in a value chain is the people who hold the genes and the people who actually hold the end user or the consumer. I think the power is shifting slightly now to the people who hold the information, and it's how the value chain connects. It's that, and for me, the disruption on the horizon is the real-time information. Now, that real-time information, whether it be at the farm level, where you can, assuming you've got internet connection, all the rest, that you can actually get access to information that can help you via an app make that decision when you are out the back of the farm trying to sort something, whether it's a consumer that's making a decision around purchase. And having just been to China and had quite a session with Alibaba, aware of how they link and they leapfrog through that value chain now. The old traditional institutions are slowly being, sort of eroded through that power of real-time information. So for me, that's where the key is going forward. I think overplaying all of this is the role of science, but science with purpose. And I think from a livestock point of view, I love the suggestion also around that social side, because there's also, I don't think we can ever ignore the fact that stockmanship is still key. You can get as much data as you like, but if you can't actually manage stock, you don't have that connection to actually see what's blatantly obviously in front of you, the animal with his leg up going like this. The data might tell you it's not got a sore foot, but and so it's actually making sure that the traditional skills are married with the new skills, and you can move forward in that way.
Good. So it kind of goes back to what, Michelle, you were saying earlier about knowledge and transferring that knowledge, yes. Educating people. Okay, so we've talked about the positive, and we can't talk about the positive without looking at the negative. So, can you now provide a negative disruptive innovation that you see up and coming that is going to affect the global livestock system? Eddie, would you like to start?
Lo negativo en la innovación es que puede llevar igual como la innovación puede ser positiva en los mismos productos, ambiente, sanidad y otros, también puede jugar el mismo rol. Una mala decisión nos puede llevar a tener el efecto totalmente contrario.
Well, as innovation could be very positive, it can also be negative as well. It can be negative to the environment, to the products that we make, and to our health. So if we make a bad decision, we might get a very negative result because of that.
Una innovación equivocada nos puede generar un gran problema de enfermedades. Ahora lo estamos viviendo con la peste porcina africana. De igual manera, una innovación para llevar a elevar la producción de algún cultivo nos puede generar algunas condiciones no sostenibles a un largo periodo.
And also something that we do regarding innovation that can create a problem has to do sometimes with diseases, as we have seen with ASF. And if we create innovation, but then we try to just increase production, that can also have other problems as a result.
Con esto quiero decir que a la innovación tenemos que ponerle una condicional importantísima, que es algo que todos debemos quedar en mantenerlo, cuidarlo. Si queremos elevar la productividad, ¿qué condicional es la que no vamos a negociar? Como por ejemplo el ambiente, ¿ya? O la salud de los seres humanos. Entonces,
when we think about innovation, there has to be something that we are not willing to trade off for that. Because if we want to increase production, we have to consider our health and our environment. So we have to be very careful with that.
En tal caso, la innovación, diríamos que per se no es un problema, no es ni malo, o sea, no es malo, podría ser, más claro, podría ser muy malo o podría ser muy bueno, dependiendo los límites que lo pongamos.
Well, innovation could be great or could be very bad. You know, we have to set the limits.
How would you set those limits?
Con un condicional que sea el más importante para nosotros, que es ambiente, que sea salud, y eso va sobre algunos, porque si solo medimos productividad podemos llegar a tener una gran producción, pero quizás no con la mejor salud y afectando el ambiente. Entonces, el condicional sería el límite hasta donde podríamos alcanzar.
Well, we have to set conditions because we cannot innovate or create a new technology without considering the environment or our health. Because if we're only going to create tools just for productivity, we are going to affect our environment. So we have to set the conditions. We have to set the limits because we cannot do this at all cost.
Yes. Thank you. Scott, do you have something you would like to add?
Yeah, I do, and you know, I don't think of it so much as negative disruption or
Sure.
negative disruption innovation so much as are we creating disincentives or creating an environment where innovations cannot flourish, and I think there are a lot of examples in that case, and so I think from the standpoint of the positive, we need to continue to focus on evidence-based policies and regulation. And you know, at one point in time, I think many folks associated sustainability with non-intervention or non-technology. And the reality is, with the challenges that we're facing in all aspects, climate, however you choose to frame it, you know, the reality is sustainability is going to require technology and intervention. It's gone 180 degrees the opposite direction. But we have to be smart about that, and we have to be wise about those technologies. We have to have credible and science-based regulatory policies and agencies to do that. And in all honesty, we have to be cautious. But one area where I think we ought to avoid is this notion of the precautionary principle. And I think that's anti-science and it's anti-cautious, actually, because what it forces us to do, is, as scientists to do, is to define a negative or to prove a negative. And that's just not possible. So I think we have to be rational. We have to focus on risk-based assessment and analysis, and we have to be excellent at that. But the precautionary principle is anti-innovation and it's anti-science.
Michelle, you're nodding your head. Do you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I guess the main talking points I wanted to make was that this entire aspect Scott talked about, in that you've got to look at the environment you're setting, and and the things I wanted to cover, what are some of those disruptive factors that set up an environment where innovation can't come to market, right? And he already mentioned some of those, and the three I've got listed are trade barriers, regulatory barriers, and I think the biggest disruptor of all would be misperception. Misperception by the public, by the consumer, and again, maybe not being scientifically driven, right? And so the example, I'll go back again to Dr. Vanina Nim's talk yesterday. I'm an UC Davis alum, so I gotta help where I can here. But she basically, again, presented wonderful genomic tools that are proven to help increase the sustainability, and selfishly, again, from my aspect, animal welfare. She actually talked about how genomics can be used to improve animal welfare concerns. And she spent an entire hour covering all of these wonderful tools, but at the end posed it to the audience and said, but will breeders actually be able to have the social license to operate with these tools, right? Will we in the industry actually be able to do that? And public fear and misperception can really, create that environment where, again, that innovation can't come forward. So I think it's also about those disruptive factors and how that creates that environment, because, again, misperception, that can lead and be connected with, again, these regulatory barriers, trade barriers, and collectively all of those together I think are important to consider in the conversation.
Okay, thank you. So the one that you thought was the most important was the consumer. That's where it's going to have the most impact. So you have to inform the consumer. Nick, what about you?
stay with the theme and where Michelle just took us into the trade conversation. I think it's tremendously important in terms of potential upside opportunities but downside risks, and we look to Africa as a continent with the recently signed into effect the African Free Trade Agreement and an area. The reality at the moment, there's more trade from Africa to Europe than there is within Africa. So how do we get the regulations, the policies, the approaches right in Africa for that to work for those opportunities to work for those that are hardest to reach, where it's cheaper to bring in chicken from Brazil than it is to produce it in Nigeria, for example. There are some important questions, and I know this afternoon we've got a session on trade, so maybe I won't delve further there. But I would like to circle back to the gender question you asked previously as well, in relation to potentially negative disruptions. And I think the reality that context matters. These innovations that work in some contexts can disadvantage in others, and that's particularly important with gender. I was in Ghana, in Accra last week for the African Green Revolution Forum, where a report was released around digitisation of agriculture, digital technologies. And I think it's the first or the most comprehensive assessment of digital in Africa, and concluded that less than 25% of the access to digital goes to women. So systemically it's not working. So how do we address that what is holding back that persistent gender gap, which is more pronounced even in digital access to tools and the benefits that come, and digital advisory services, finances, inputs, markets that all increasingly connect through digital. So I think while digital is tremendously important upside disruptor, when it comes to women, there are really important questions about how we reach men and women equally, but also how we reach vertically the hardest to reach in economic sense, and then horizontally in geographic sense where there's not the access to those the coverage in the networks.
Thank you. All right, I'm leaving you to the end again. I'm sorry.
It's good. It's actually given me time to think a little more, and actually listening to everyone else really helps. I guess when I looked at the term negatively disruptive innovation, I was reading it probably innovation that's used in a negative way. And I think that's more around misinformation. It's all very well to have real-time information, but if there's misinformation, you get some of that credibility challenge that goes on, and you get the derailment of what you thought was a nice flow of information back and forth. Social media has a huge role to play in that, obviously, and so you also get people who take positions or want to actually attack for a variety of different reasons. So I think it's how technology is used that can be disruptive, but there's other forms of disruption. A number of people have already mentioned the fact that legislation can be just plain wrong. I've talked about policymakers here being well-meaningly incorrect. Or chasing rainbows. Sometimes algorithms are also wrong within models, and so models that are used for either a legislative or a connective sense are actually doing mischief. And so those are all aspects I was thinking about. But then we just turn now to the consumer. The negatively disruptive innovation will be the innovation that actually delivers to the consumer something that satisfies them better than what our product does. And so, something, whether it's artificial meat, to be honest, I think it's a little bit like, what is it, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. All they're doing at the moment is copying meat. But at some point, they'll actually deliver something that the consumer says, yes, I want that, and that's everything I need, and actually what I've always had is no longer relevant. So losing our relevance, I think, is probably an important part of just watching that negative disruption innovation in perhaps a more consumer-centric way.
Yeah, so losing your relevance, how would you avoid that? Any ideas?
Well, I guess the relevance bit is interesting because the beauty is that there is no such person as a consumer. It's a little bit like there's no such person as a farmer. And so within the consumer world, we now have multiple fragmentation of consumer needs, wants, desires, all the rest of it. And when people say to me, well, aren't you terrified at the thought of all this artificial meat coming? So well, I'm more terrified about how we're going to feed the world. And the previous speakers showed us, those dynamics. But it's how you determine who does want what you do have, and then making sure you're delivering to them in a way that actually is sustainable. Now, you will always, it's the five forces law that you are always going to be challenged every day in terms of how you run your business, but it's keeping smart, keeping one step ahead and making sure you're aware of all those forces and how they're actually could be attacking your profit.
Thank you. Okay, so now taking a little turn and getting into climate change. So we all know, or with the current perception of the livestock industry's role in climate change, how would you guys say that these innovations that you've talked about or introduced contribute to the sustainability of the livestock industry? I'm going to pick on you, Nicola, now that you're going to go first.
I got used to hearing everyone else
I know.
first.
You got comfortable going last.
Oh dear, I've got to think now. Okay, well, I'm going to be a little bit provocative in my comment on this because, and it goes back to some of the comments I made before around science, around well-meaningly incorrect, around the way we actually view things. Because one of the areas that concerns me when we get to livestock is this absolute obsession we've got at the moment with the greenhouse gases. And the reason I do get concerned is that when I go back to the Paris Accord, it talks about anthropomorphic activity. Now, animals have been belching since they learnt how to convert grass into meat and milk for us. And that's not an anthropomorphic activity. Now, I know this is the wrong audience, and there'll be people who'll say, well, she just doesn't get it and she needs to go back to the trees or whatever, but it's just something that I think we just get carried away a little bit with the rhetoric, and we get carried away with trying to be so terribly earnest and well-meaning in these things instead of actually putting into some form of perspective. But moving forward, we do need animal protein in our diet. Animals will be a part of our world moving as we evolve, always have been, and so we've just got to learn how we balance these things out. But in terms of the disruptive innovation that we've got and how it'll contribute to that, well, I believe that in terms of this real-time information side of things, we will be able to provide proof, and that proof is critical both for certification and for the consumer. It also helps with that timely decision-making at any point in that value chain. So we have to, the onus is on us now to prove the outcome of what we do in every sense. And so the world hasn't got simpler, it's got a lot more complex. And that's where the data will really help. In terms of the people side of sustainability, I think the whole sort of disruptive innovation can only make life better, robotics, all those sorts of things, better decisions, better informed communities, better informed consumers. But the challenge is data overload, making sure that you can actually work through all this complexity and make those decisions. And then fundamentally for me, if you've got a corporate social responsibility, what's now called an ESG driver in your business, it's been proven time and again that leads to profit, so there's your economic outcome.
Okay. Do you know of any organizations that are actually leading the charge on these innovations?
You're on to the next question.
Yeah.
Well, I thought about that too. When I was on the Fonterra board, one of the things I used to sort of ask them to think about quite a lot was the fact that there's companies like Unilever who'd taken such an out there stance and really sort of led the world in terms of, come on guys, it's time we brought all these things in. Interestingly, just flying over on the plane, there was a whole front page article in the Financial Times on, gosh, the world has changed. It's no longer just capitalism. It's now also about society and environment. And I sort of thought, well, really, guys? Surely it should have been the driver all along, but it's BlackRock are heading that. Everybody's speaking now about the fact that we've actually got to cover off on all aspects, all stakeholders when we run businesses. I think it's something farmers have done forever, but the corporate world is, just waking up to it. So it's good to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Scott, what about you?
Well, there's a number of things from a disruptive innovation. Those 4 themes that I mentioned, I think, will all have a big impact on this. And again, I would come back to the notion that, where we've come today, in large part in countries like the United States, is a lot of focus and motivation on economies of scale. And that's a very important economic driver and always will be. But what we have now is the opportunity with both genetics as well as digital ag is to reduce that complexity. So instead of just saying, it's easier just to do more of this and deal with it at the end than it is to actually to precisely apply or whatever the particular input would be. I think those opportunities are going to explode in terms of usability. The other thing I think that we'll be able to do, I think, is really begin to leverage a lot of the human nutrition aspects on things. Just as there's a big effort now to define, if you will, chronic disease endpoints for foods and human diets, I think the opportunity to do those kinds of things for animals is going to be a natural spin-off of that overall effort. And the supercomputing, the ability to do the the genome and everything of animals and plants, for virtually no cost anymore, is going to offer all kinds of opportunities for us to really change the game and think big. But we have to do that. We have to think big, and we have to understand how that fits. And then I would also go back to what I'll call the non-scientific innovations and talk about something like this, because at the end of the day, we need regulatory to ensure that we meet the minimum standards, that we don't cross the red line, as it were, in whatever that is. But at the end of the day, the consumer decides, and that's the much bigger opportunity I think we have to move the dial is to make sure that the consumer has good education and they have the opportunity. We value greatly in this country the value to choose, and so when you regulate things, you take away the value to choose beyond the necessary aspects of it. But startups and opportunities to customize this give people back that power, and those are the kind of things that will allow us to move the dial, or will allow society to move the dial over time, while allowing those segments that actually don't have that affluency and the opportunity to make those same kinds of choices to meet their nutrition needs. We have the opportunity for others to make that as well. And then we'll have all kinds of positive externalities associated with climate and everything associated with that.
So the follow-up question is, are there particular organizations or companies that you think are delivering these innovations, and are they focused on sustainability?
Well, I would come back to what I said earlier in terms of, I think the underappreciated, by large part, group that's out there that's really beginning to emerge and make itself known, sometimes, caught up in the chain of purchases and the rest of it, or the startup types of companies, the ones who think big, that aren't constrained by quarter-to-quarter dividend results and these kinds of things. And they're the ones that ultimately are going to make the big impacts, who have been making the big impacts. And the kinds of places that develop some of the early genetic technologies and some of the digital technologies, as those become more mainstream and accepted, and the ability to ramp those up, I think that's where we're going to see those innovations come from. But we have to have that infrastructure. We have to have that ability within the agricultural communities to be able to recognize the nuggets, make sure those nuggets are put to use, and ultimately can change the way agriculture is done to take it to that next level. And I would again reference how far we have come, and sometimes we think we're gone as far as we can go, but there's always that next big breakthrough innovation that's going to get us to that next level. And I think we ought to keep our eye on that prize.
Thank you. Nick, you got any idea or any thoughts that you want to share about these innovations that are contributing to the sustainability of the livestock system?
Yeah, particularly with the climate change angle that you asked. And I think that I'd stay with Nicole's theme around perspective when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions versus adapting to a changing climate. And we know with the commitments and the money invested globally in responding to climate change, it's disproportionately into mitigation, not adaptation. And when we look at smallholders, the impact of a changing climate is going to be felt most keenly with pastoralists, with smallholders who are already farming and producing livestock in some of the most challenging agroecologies. So we look at the Sahel and we know that projections of both higher temperatures but more extreme events and the consequences that has for eroding the natural resource base and further disadvantaging. And it's the sequence of bad years that we know pushes people back into poverty and undermines a lot of the progress. So if we're looking at climate change eroding 5 to 20% of productivity in agriculture by 2050, then all of the good work in innovation that we've been talking about comes to naught when it's undermined, particularly in the lower latitudes. And there will be winners and losers in a changing environment, but importantly, most of the losers are likely to be those already in resource-poor contexts. So I think that's a really important piece. I think, so how do we adapt? How do we get better epidemiology, how we surveillance of pest and disease, which are going to change, the vectors of animal disease are going to change under a changing climate. How do we get more resilient tropical adapted breeds? And I need to give a plug for the work that ILRI does as part of the CGIAR, and globally I find it extraordinary that it's less than $1 billion spent annually on the CGIAR, the world's preeminent research for development outfit. Now that's woeful underinvestment relative to the challenge that faces us increasingly with a changing climate. So the work that ILRI does in connecting the Advanced Research Institute innovations, understanding context locally and generating public goods that national research systems can adapt, and so the important role that the national governments, state governments play. But I just conclude with the role that private sector plays, which perhaps needs particular emphasis in relation to climate change, but in relation to a smallholder or pastoralist context, and the Foundation's interests in understanding where are the market failures, where's the market not working, and what can we do with finite philanthropic capital to change that equation so that there is a business case, there are business models where the private sector can deliver at scale the sort of technologies that farmers need to respond to a changing climate.
Thank you. Michelle, can you add to that piece on the private sector?
Sure. Well, I guess the thing that I wanted to interject with was keeping my people-centered approach, but tying it to animal health, okay? And I think that thinking about it from the context of the climate discussions and perception. So number one, an industry has never been hurt or harmed by investing in the people that operate it, okay? And number two, when we think about animal health, the OIE, or the World Organization for Animal Health, has reported that 20% of animals die globally, right, due to stressors and disease, right? And that's a huge amount of waste, right? That otherwise all the resources that went into those animals, right, and they never met that endpoint to nourish us or to help us sustain our livelihoods, right? And so I think that in itself, if we focus in on that and focus in on reducing that number, that can significantly improve, again, those conversations and the tools utilized, how they're utilized to, again, achieve that sustainability. And so I think that in order to reduce that number, we need, again, these innovations that help us improve how we care and handle for all of the animals, and innovations that help our caretakers, our farmers take care of the people that tend to their animals, or also make sure that to your point, that they have access to those tools, right? And so I was able to sit in it was the parallel program yesterday, the innovations for smallholders, and holy smokes, that opened up my eyes, because again, I'm US based, so I don't always get to hear on a lot of these global conversations and efforts. And again, it's just about, this idea from the private sector, perhaps repackaging or manufacturing tools like veterinary medicines in volumes or sizes that these smallholder farmers can utilize and reduce that wastage, but again, re-enhance that knowledge and training to empower them, right? And whether it's manufacturing the products in that manner, or I know Elanco's participated in projects too where they use radio broadcasting to help those smallholder farmers have access to where those tools lie, but then also the knowledge behind how to utilize those things, and disease awareness and prevention and all of that. So I think that from that perspective and focusing on reducing that 20% globally can be very, very impactful from that conversation of sustainability, even relative to climate change.
Great, thank you. All right, Eddie, it's your turn.
Tenemos varios caminos ya marcados acerca de la innovación productiva.
We already established different paths for productive innovation.
Pero cualquier decisión de innovación requiere una política pública importante.
But any kind of innovation needs some public policy in place for that to be efficient.
Para promover el cuidado ambiental, la sostenibilidad y un requerimiento esencial que la población mundial sigue creciendo y la necesidad de productos será cada día mayor.
And of course, we have to consider our environment, and we have to be sustainable, and we have to think that our population is growing all the time. So we're going to need food for everybody.
El reto resulta muy grande porque tenemos que tener una visión de producción sostenible, productiva y que cuide al ambiente.
And the challenge is a great challenge because we have to be able to produce in a sustainable, productive, and profitable way, and at the same time we have to take care of our environment.
Muchas de las veces los que nos dedicamos a la producción pecuaria no hemos defendido las buenas acciones que hacemos en campo y la percepción de la población muchas de las veces cree que todo lo que hacemos es negativo.
And we in the livestock industry have not been able to communicate our efforts well to our population because sometimes we're perceived like some people that don't care about the environment.
Uno de los principales objetivos y misión de estas reuniones tiene que ser salir con un mensaje muy claro, salir con un mensaje positivo y demostrar las buenas acciones que hacemos en cada uno de nuestros países.
And one of the main objectives of this type of meeting should be like to set a clear message for us to be able to spread out. And we have to show our best practices to the world so that people can understand what is that we do.
Y volvemos a las preguntas anteriores y tenemos al social media y tenemos toda la información a la mano, grandes técnicos, grandes profesionales, grandes productores, pero tenemos que mostrarlo más, tenemos que mostrar el camino que estamos buscando para que la percepción de la población no vaya tan en contra de la producción.
And we have social media, and we have great scientists, we have professors, we have everybody, we have people who are very knowledgeable about our industry. But we have to portray our industry, and we have to show the world, so the perception about our industry shouldn't be the one that we have. So we have to spread the word.
Thank you. So the common thing that I'm hearing you guys say is knowledge, whether it's informing the consumer about where their food is coming from, or sharing knowledge about how best practices. And social media seems to be definitely a way that you guys are talking about getting the information out there. So that concludes my 5 questions for you. So now I have some questions from the audience. But first of all, thank you for sharing your insights. And we'll try, I think we have about 10 minutes left. So we'll try to get through these 4 questions. So the first question for the panel is disruptive technology what we really need for livestock production? Is there a distinction between enabling technology and disruptive? Yeah. Is there a distinction between enabling technology and disruptive innovation? We'll go with that. Anybody want to take a stab at it? Scott?
So it was
enabling
and disruptive?
First part is disruptive technology what we really need for livestock production?
Well, we won't know till we're disrupted.
That is true.
And that's the difficult part about disruptive technology. You can't always see it coming. Mm-hmm. It comes quickly and it accelerates quickly. But what I think as we talk about, the balance that we have to seek is, at the end of the day, whether it's climate or where there is, it's a balance between productivity and conservation. And the opportunity that disruptive technology brings to us is not just the ability to reduce inputs and so forth. We cannot do that. We can't have healthier soil and healthier animals and healthier systems if we're not also making them more productive and honestly more profitable. And by the way, I hope the rancher gets a cut of this marketing scheme. But the point is that the disruptive technology will allow us to do as we've done in the past, but even faster, to do more with less. And with doing more with less on the land and in the areas where we should be doing, where we can do more with less, that gives us the opportunity to go back into conservation. And one of the factoids I learned when I came into the role is that in the United States, we have about 1 million acres a year that go from farmland back into forestry. And nothing has a bigger impact on climate change and mitigating carbon than those kinds of conversions.
Right.
So I think disruptive technology, depending on how it disrupts, will ultimately, set the stage on how we address these big challenges, these grand challenges.
Anybody?
Just
Nick?
so go ahead, please.
Mine was just a simple observation that to me enabling versus disruptive is like the discussion around efficiency versus effectiveness. Because enabling is basically helping you do what you're doing better, whereas the disruptive is saying, actually, there's something very different out there that we could grab. Yeah.
Just to build on that very briefly, and I know you've got some more questions to ask, but I see them very much going hand in hand. So I'll use an example of the Foundation's investment in Stellapps, a dairy innovation company that the Foundation's partnered with. The enabling technologies that are needed in the digital space around spatial data with soils, with landholders, with smallholders, where the opportunities lie, and then the business models such as Stellapps that can disrupt on top of that. So very much the complementarity between what's in the public good sphere in terms of platforms or enabling technologies that then provide the space and the momentum for the disruptive technologies, often driven by the private sector to take the sector forward.
Michelle, do you have anything to add?
I completely agree with all those comments, yeah. We'll move
Eddie?
forward.
Okay, on to the next one. What is the possibility for cellular agriculture as a disruptive innovation? In particular, what are the realistic prospects for cell-grown meat? Any? No?
I'm happy to. I mean, that there's a variety of different forms of protein, animal protein, being able to be created through a variety of different scientific methods. So, anything's possible.
Anything's possible.
But
And do you think there's a market for that?
the world has to be fed. We have a large population growth coming. We know that the existing land base we have won't meet that demand. So the more we have created from a variety of sources, the better, as far as I can see.
Okay. Scott?
No, it's a tremendous innovation. Again, it is one of those disruptive innovations. How it will be, accepted by the consumer is yet to be seen, but that happens over time, right? Even a lot of the things that we accept today were not originally accepted as they came forward. So, I think at the end of the day, the consumer and the market will decide if those innovations ever catch hold. But they do need to be, all the innovations need to be transparent and clear as to what they are, and not deceiving in any way, and people can accept that, then it'll be fine.
So transparency and then having those regulations in place, right? Just make sure that it's safe for consumption. What impact will climate change have on the innovation gains we have made and will make in producing sustainable livestock? So what impact will climate change have on the innovation gains we have made so far and will have an impact on producing sustainable livestock?
The short answer might be that we don't know with precision, but some of the projections are that it's going to be significant. But as I touched on earlier, there will be winners and losers there, and the losers particularly concentrated in those areas that are already the most challenged. I quoted the figures 5 to 20% reduction in productivity. Obviously, it's going to vary by livestock, it's going to by breed, it's going to vary by country. The short answer is we don't have good knowledge of that. The models that the IPCC have been relying on, and the recent report about land impacts came out last month. There's consensus around the upward trend in warming, where there's more uncertainty, of course, is around the more extreme events where they'll be impacting and what can be done to prepare the livestock sector in developed and developing countries to be able to adapt. So considerable uncertainty, but overall likely to reduce productivity.
I'll add to that as well. A lot of those models that Nick mentioned, they are not robust enough or have quantified data to capture things like animal health, stress, morbidity, mortality. There are currently, at least here in the U.S., there are projects that are being funded to capture that type of data that's needed to really make them robust. So I think that once we are able to help model a lot of those things, that'll definitely help drive that conversation too.
Okay, thank you. All right, the final question is, how does the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock promote innovation, while at the same time controlling practices and products which benefit only those promoting them? So basically, it's having two objectives, right? You're going to promote innovation, but at the same time, you are controlling practices and products which benefit those that are promoting them.
So we're promoting practices and products.
Controlling practices and products.
Okay. But the beneficiaries of those products are the people who consume them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not quite too sure in terms of the question. Obviously, there's profit to be made along the value chain,
right.
but ultimately you're delivering to an end consumer. And so whatever you're doing in the way of innovation, you're either innovating so that the consumer, well, hopefully always you're innovating so the consumer is better served. And then through the chain to that consumer, there are people who are obviously making profit on the way because otherwise they wouldn't be there, or they couldn't be there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't quite get the twist in the question, but maybe that's...
Yes, maybe... That's essentially what it is, right? You're looking at the consumer. The consumer is basically the one that is valuing that innovation, and then you hope to share the wealth along the chain.
The consumer benefits from the innovation.
The benefits,
They may not always value it because they may not even know it exists.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think there is a component, though, that does tie into that, and the reality is that any new product starts with a product goal, which starts with a discovery effort, and it's a multi-year process. And going back to the theme of over-regulation is that when there is over-regulation, organizations, I suppose like Elanco, have to put so much money into managing the current that they limit the ability to focus on discovery. And so you have to focus on those things that are near term, and it's difficult to invest in those longer term moonshots, if you want to think of it that way. So it's an ecosystem. The more regulation you have, it's the reason you see a consolidation in the industry, is because it's very, very risky to develop agricultural products that ultimately will make it to the marketplace. So society can play a role in that by de-risking that and encouraging disruptive technology and disruptive investments. Organizations like Gates does that as well.
Great. Anybody else? Any last comments? Any final messages?
Yo creo que el principal beneficiado de la agenda global y de todo este tipo de reuniones es el consumidor.
I think that the end user, the consumer, is the one that benefits the most from the global agenda and this type of meeting.
En primer lugar es él, porque en realidad todos podremos ser productores, estar en el ente político, pero terminamos siendo todos consumidores.
Because all of us are consumers. We can be in the producing area of this industry, we could be farmers, but at the end we're all consumers.
Entonces, la agenda global lo que nos ayuda es a visualizar cómo debemos posicionarnos con el consumidor y cuidando todos los parámetros que hemos tratado anteriormente, que es ambiente, sanidad, productividad.
And the global agenda gives us like a roadmap and see how can we position ourselves when we deal with the consumer, taking into consideration health, the environment, and also production.
Ojalá a futuro podamos sacar un esquema de certificación o de una manera de producir que todos podamos verlo como factible a nivel mundial. En ciertos términos, ya tener unas coincidencias en el planeta.
And I hope that someday we can get a global certification. Well, we have to create a scheme for all of us to be able to be certified in a feasible way, so we all agree how to take care of our planet.
De esta manera podríamos generar que todo este conocimiento que tenemos de todos los sectores nos puedan apoyar a una mejor percepción del público en cada uno de los países.
And the hope that that information and that would help us to get a better perception on behalf of the consumers, because that knowledge should be shared by all the different sectors that are involved in this environment.
Thank you. Once again, it's that knowledge and educating everybody, right? So that concludes our discussion. So thank you very much for sharing your insights on this topic. And so round of applause for you guys. I also want to thank the audience for staying engaged. That's 90 minutes. That's a long time. So thank you. And thank you for the questions. And also thank you to the organizers for challenging us with this very important topic. So with that, we are adjourned for lunch.